Morning, everybody. If you don't know me, my name's Josh. I'm part of the leadership team here at RK. As Rich has just sort of indicated, we've just been on holiday this week. We've been camping in the Yorkshire Dales, and on our sort of car journey there, we were reminiscing over some historic car journeys that we've had with the kids. And Esther reminded us about a particular car journey where Alexia, our oldest daughter, she was obviously quite young at the time, and she was shouting at us saying, I need the toilet. So Esther said, can't you just hold it? And she said, I can't, I'm holding an umbrella. But it makes me laugh every time I remember that, because it's interesting how we can misunderstand the meaning of things that people say, or get in our head the wrong idea of that meaning. It was only recently that I told Esther that the meaning of a shed load of stuff doesn't actually mean a garden shed full of stuff. It means a lorry's shed its load. So it's a lorry full of stuff. Now, the principle behind the phrase is the same. It basically means a lot of stuff. But a lorry full of stuff is slightly more than a garden shed full of stuff. So although the meaning is the same, the understanding, the true meaning is slightly different. And I'm going to be looking at one of the most famous stories that Jesus ever told. It's the story of a rich man who has two sons. His youngest son wants to leave and go and live a better life in the city. So he asks his dad for his share of the inheritance early, so he can just go and do whatever he wants rather than wait for his dad to die. So his dad says yes. He gives him his share of the money. He takes it and basically blows the whole lot on buying expensive things, on prostitutes, and just having a party, having a good time. And he just fritters it away. Then he finds himself in a bit of a tough spot. So eventually he decides, I'm going to return to my dad, I'm going to go home. But what he doesn't realise is that ever since he left, his dad's been waiting for him to return. And we see this beautiful picture of the son returning home and the dad running to him. Now, in those days, dads didn't run. There wasn't a dad's race at the school sports day. It was seen as a childish thing to do. But this dad runs to his son, throws his arms around him. And the beauty of this story is that we can walk away from God, we can walk away from our Father in heaven, but he's always there waiting when we return. He holds no grudges. He just wants to embrace us and welcome us home. That's it. I guess you could say that's preach done, and that would be the shortest preach in RK history. But as I was preparing this talk, I realised I'd got this meaning of the story trapped in my head like Esther's garden shed full of stuff. And that meaning isn't wrong, but I hadn't necessarily seen the full meaning of the story. It's only part of what I think Jesus is trying to say through this story. I think the reason we tend to only concentrate on this is because the story tends to be called the story of the prodigal son. So we automatically concentrate on the younger son, the prodigal son. But Jesus doesn't only focus on one brother. In my Bible, the title of the story is The Parable of the Lost Son, which I think might be more helpful, as it doesn't highlight either son. And at the start of the story, Jesus starts it by saying, a man had two sons. The story isn't only about the prodigal son, but it compares two brothers, two different personalities, and two types of people. So let's read the passage. It's Luke 15, 11 through to 32. It says, Jesus continued, there was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the youngest son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have good food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours, who was dead and is alive again, he was lost and is found.'" And you can just imagine that the people listening to the story might have found it quite heartwarming, quite emotional, that a son who was seemingly lost and wayward comes home and is welcomed with open arms. But I think some of them might have been quite offended. I think the reason that Jesus mentions both brothers is because he's explaining two types of people, two ways of being lost, but only one way home. If you jump to the start of chapter 15, it tells us who Jesus is talking to. He's surrounded by two types of people. He's got tax collectors and sinners, basically people you wouldn't expect to see in church, people who are seen to be the lowest of society. And then there's Pharisees and teachers of the law. These are basically extremely religious people, the type of people that don't miss a Sunday. They know the Bible off by heart and look down on anyone that doesn't live up to the expectations and by their religious rules. And I just wonder if Jesus makes making a comparison between the two types of people listening and the two brothers. So you've got the younger brother, who represents the tax collectors and sinners, and then you've got the older brother, who represents the religious listeners. Now, in a family, it's quite typical for an older brother to be the parent pleaser, the more responsible child, and the younger sibling tends to be the rebel of the family. If there's three brothers in the family, then the older brother still tends to be that responsible parent pleaser, and the younger brother becomes the mother child, the baby of the family who can never do anything wrong. The middle child is the rebel. They're the one that always gets into trouble and always gets blamed for everything. I'm the middle of three boys, so If you're also a middle child, I feel your pain. But Jesus shows us a father with two sons. And actually, both are equally alienated from his heart. The younger brother turns away from his father's heart by running away and becoming a stranger. But the older brother becomes just as much a stranger to the father through his anger. The father has to go out to both brothers to try to get them to come in. But here's the mind-blowing part. One of his sons is a very good son. One of his sons is a bad son. But in the end, it's the bad son who comes into the father's feast, and it's the good son who refuses to. Today in our society, most people would associate the church with a group of people that are religious and stick to a set of rules in order to get to heaven or to get into the kingdom of God. But the irony is that it was the religious, moralistic people in the Bible who were offended by Jesus' teaching. You see it throughout the teaching of Jesus. Every time Jesus came up against a religious person versus a sexual, racial, or political outcast person, it's always the outcast who that related to Jesus, and the religious older brother type didn't. In Matthew, Jesus says to the religious leaders, "The tax collectors and prostitutes enter the kingdom of heaven before you." Jesus' teaching always attracted the non-religious whilst offending the conservative religious people of the day. I think we should long for churches today to attract the outsiders, the broken and marginalised, the wild life lovers, the younger brothers, just like Jesus did. So the younger brother, he basically goes up to his dad and says, "Can I have my inheritance now?" Traditionally, back in the day when the father died, his estate would get divided up into thirds. So 2/3 would be given to the older brother, and 1/3 would be given to the younger brother. So when the younger son says, "Can I have my third now?" he's basically saying, "All I want you for is your money. I wish you were dead so I could have the money now." He's been waiting all his life for his dad to die so he can get his inheritance. But now he's bored of waiting and says, "Give it me now. I'm fed up of waiting. I just want it." Now, if I was the dad, I think I know what I'd say. I'd basically tell him to jog on and give him absolutely nothing. But the father in this story gives the son exactly what he wants. Most of the father's wealth would have been tied up in land and property. So the father would have literally had to have sold off land and property to give the son what he wanted. Could you imagine just selling your house, moving into a smaller property just so your son can go and flitter away your hard-earned cash on partying and prostitutes? He then goes off, blows the money, and ends up in trouble. But now he plots a plan to get home. So he decides he's going to go home, admit he's messed up, and ask if he can work for his dad. He doesn't ask if he can rejoin the family or be taken back in, as if nothing had happened, but just that he could have a job. And when he gets home, his dad sees him and he runs to him. As I've already said, the fact that the father runs to him is a significant thing in itself. It wouldn't have been the done thing and not befitting a man of his standing. But his emotion and his love for his son are so great that he can't help himself. He just wants to embrace his son, who he thought he'd lost. The son then tries to roll out this plan to admit his wrong and ask for a job, but his dad pretty much ignores him and just says, "Quick, get the best robe and put it on him." The best robe would have been the father's own robe. This would have been a clear symbol that the father would have been saying, "I'm not going to wait until you've paid off your debt. I'm not going to wait until you've grovelled for forgiveness. You're not going to earn your way back into the family. I'm simply going to take you back. I'll cover your nakedness and shame with my own robe. It commands that the servants prepare a feast with a fattened calf. Meat of any kind was a delicacy, but the fattened calf was reserved for really special occasions and would probably have meant that the whole town would have been invited to join the feast, a bit like a Christmas dinner and New Year's Eve party all rolled into one. So he throws this massive party all in honour of a dishonourable son. So you can just imagine the scene. People are passing around the pigs in blankets, there's Yorkshire puddings getting passed around, roast potatoes, sherry trifle, live music, partying, dancing, and just having a good time. But did I just say something controversial then? Do people have Yorkshire puddings on the Christmas dinner? Or is it? I guess that's another debate. But now the father is going to have to deal with the older brother's bad attitude. The story to this point challenges the mindset and is offensive to the older brother. It says that God's love and forgiveness can pardon and restore any kind of sin and wrongdoing. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. It doesn't matter if you've deliberately wronged other people or even murdered people. It doesn't matter if you've abused yourself. The younger brother knew that in his father's house there was abundant food to spare, but he also discovered that there was grace to spare. There's no evil that the Father's love can't pardon and cover. There's no sin that is a match for his grace. And Jesus shows us that the Father pounces on the Son in love before the Son can even ask for forgiveness or show that he's trying to clean up his life. The Father's love and acceptance are absolutely free. Now, some people who concentrate on the story about the younger son might say, look, this story contradicts traditional Christian teaching. They might say in this story that there's no mention of a price to be paid for sin or for wrongdoing. There's no need for a saviour on a cross that pays for sin. God is just a universal God of love that accepts everyone no matter what. But if that was the message, then Jesus would have ended that story with just that first brother. I heard a story recently about a 6-year-old boy who was in a McDonald's drive-through queue, and he said to his mum that he wanted to use his spending money to buy a meal for the car behind. When his mum asked him why, he said he just wanted to do something kind. So the boy and his mum ordered the meal and said that they wanted to pay for the meal for the car behind, and they had to go and wait in a parking space for their meal to come out. When their meal got brought out, the lady said, "You've started a chain reaction. All the cars are now paying for the car behind." She said, "But better than that, everyone's happy. Everyone's got a smile on their face. It's made everybody joyful." And the mum was obviously very proud of her son. But she said, "It cost my son his pocket money, but the cost he paid has spread a joy to those people that is free." Those people in that queue behind received something that was free, but it did come at a cost to the boy. I think the start of this story shows the freeness of God's grace, but the second part shows us the cost of that grace. So Jesus continues, and he starts talking about the older brother. And he continues with the story, and he tells us that when the older brother hears that his younger brother has returned and been welcomed back with open arms by his dad, he throws a proper strop. He's not happy at all. And now it's his turn to disgrace his dad. He flat out refuses to go in to the biggest and most public feast that his dad has probably ever put on. He stays outside so that everyone can see that he doesn't agree with what his dad has done, which makes the father have to go out to him. It's probably quite a shaming thing that the father has to leave his party, leave his guests, and go outside in sight of everyone to try and persuade his oldest son to come into the party. You can just imagine all the guests slide gossiping, be like, look what's happening, look, he's had to go out to his son because they've had a fallout. So the father continues to try to get him to join them, but the older son just won't go in. He explains that he's upset with the cost of everything that is happening. He says, you never even gave me a goat for a party. How dare you give him the calf? The fattened calf is only a symbol, though. The true cost was much more than just the calf. By bringing the younger son back into the family, he's made the younger son an heir again, with a claim to a third of their already reduced wealth. So the older brother is stood there thinking, I've worked my backside off whilst my younger brother has gone and blown a third of our money, and now he's back to take another chunk. And if I'm honest, you can sort of understand where he's coming from. The older brother reels out what he's done. He says, I've never disobeyed you, so I've got the rights. You should ask me about this. In his anger, he completely disrespects his dad. He doesn't even address him with any respect. He just says, look, almost as if he says, look, mate. And he does all this in front of everybody. But despite the older brother's insult and disrespect to his father, the father responds again with amazing tenderness. He basically says, son, despite how you have treated me and disrespected me, I still want you to come into the party. I'm not going to disown your brother, but I don't want to disown you either. Please, swallow your pride and come into the party. It's up to you. Do you want to come in or not? And just like any good story, we're left on this cliffhanger. What's going to happen? Will the older son get over his own issues? Will he let go of his pride and go into the feast? Jesus doesn't tell us. I think the reason for this is because the question here is directed at the older brothers that are in the crowd listening, and the question is for them to answer. A lot of people think that to get into the kingdom of God, the good people are in and the bad people are out. But the gospel says that the humble are in and the proud are out. You can see here and through the Bible that when the gospel is taught, it is the older brothers who are more offended and the younger brothers that are generally more open and less offended. If you dig down, the younger brother and the older brother both had the same problem. They weren't really interested in the father, but they were only interested in his things. The only difference is that the younger brother's problem is easier to see. He literally runs away with the father's things. The older brother stays close to the father, so it's harder to see. But he thinks by doing good, he'll get the father's things. They both don't really care about the father, they just want his money. But they have different ways of getting it. The older brother ends up just as lost as the younger brother, not despite his good deeds, but because of them. Now, we see why running from God is a deeper definition of sin than breaking the rules of God. Because you can run from God either by breaking his rules or by keeping them. The difference between a religious person and a true Christian is that the religious person obeys God to get control over God and to get things from God. But the Christian obeys God just to get God. I said earlier that if you only take the first part of this story about the younger brother, then the welcome seems cheap. That there's no punishment, no penalty, is just taken back in. But I don't think that as long as we are sorry, God just accepts us whatever we've done and there's no cost to it. Those people in the queue at McDonald's got a free meal and a smile on their face, and it didn't cost them anything, but it cost that 6-year-old boy. And the younger brother got a robe, a ring. He got a place back in the inheritance. But the only way the father could do that was at great expense to the older brother. The younger brother had already taken away his portion of the inheritance. And now every penny that the father had belonged by right to the older brother. Bringing the younger brother back into the family isn't free. It will be expensive. The father can't bring him back into the family without it being at the expense of the older son. So what does it mean for us? I think this story points straight to the gospel message, that we all need an older brother. But in the gospel message, the older brother doesn't stay at home and then kick off about how much it's going to cost when the father brings the younger son home. In the gospel message, we see the true older brother in Jesus. In the story, the older brother goes out looking for his younger brother. He finds him in the pigsty. He takes off his robe and he wraps it around him. He takes off his rings and he puts them on his fingers. He picks him up and puts him over his shoulder and he carries him back to the feast and he sits him at his place at the table. And he knows that it's going to cost him personally. If you associate with the older brother or the younger brother in this story, no matter how far you run away, no matter how many steps you take in a direction away from God, you only need to turn around and take one step back, and you'll be back, and the Father will meet you with open arms.